Let me welcome most warmly our guest speaker for today, Dr. Sara Laviosa. Sara Laviosa is a professor at the University of Università di Bari Aldo Moro. Sara Laviosa holds a B.A. honors in psychology, an M.A. in TESOL, and a Ph.D. in Translation Studies. She is Associate Professor in English Language and Translation Studies at the Università degli Studi di Bari, Aldo Moro. Her research interests include corpus linguistics and translation studies. She is author of numerous papers published in international journals and collected volumes. She is also author of 3 monographs: Corpus-Based Translation Studies, 2002, Translation and Language Education, 2014, and Linking Words or Linking Worlds in 2020. She is co-author with Adriana Pagano, Hanon Kimpanin, and Meng Ji of Textual and Contextual Analysis in Empirical Translation Studies, 2017. She is also founder and editor of the international journal Translation and Translanguaging in Multilingual Contexts, and I have the pleasure and I'm honored to be member of the editorial board of this journal. Sara Laviosa is also co-editor with Maria González Davies of the Routledge Handbook of Translation and Education, 2020. Her forthcoming publications are the Oxford Handbook of Translation and Social Practices, co-edited with Meng Ji, and other CTS Spring-Cleaning, a critical reflection, which is a special issue of MonTI, co-edited with María Calzada Perez. This is our guest speaker for today, Sara Laviosa. Dr. Sara Laviosa is a very close friend of mine. We had the chance to meet in on several occasions in Tunisia and in the UK. She will be speaking today about pedagogical translation and how pedagogical translation can be a cross-linguistic mediation. Without further ado, I hand it over to Sara to start a presentation. And as you can see in the screen, there is a PowerPoint presentation. I hope that everyone can see the PowerPoint presentation. She will be speaking for around 35 or 40 minutes, and then we will open it up to the Q&A discussion. Sara, over to you. And can you please use the mic? Your mic is muted, I think.
Okay, right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to take part in this very interesting series of talks, Encounters in Translation. And I'm very grateful to Professor Hammouda Salhi for his very kind invitation. So what I'd like to do during this talk is to examine the place and role of pedagogical translation as a form of cross-linguistic mediation, particularly in the teaching of mother languages in undergraduate degree programs. And to that end, I'd like to give you some background information about the main topic of discussion. Since the turn of the century, there has been a major paradigm shift in applied language studies that favors multilingualism rather than monolingualism as the new norm of applied linguistic and sociolinguistic analysis. This new orientation, named the multilingual turn, takes account of the complex processes inherent in languages in contact as they are used by plurilingual individuals engaging in intercultural communication in their everyday social, academic, and professional lives. The multilingual turn upholds an ecological model of language, which views language as a semiotic ecosystem by means of which individuals relate to the world and to each other using verbal and other sign systems. The multilingual turn upholds a model of learning that involves mutual exchange of knowledge and skills between teacher and students and among students themselves. And such a model presupposes that learners participate in collaborative learning, and this is in line with the principle of sociocultural theory developed by Lev Vygotsky in the 1970s. The multilingual turn has contributed significantly to the re-evaluation of pedagogical translation in second language acquisition studies, bilingual education, and language teaching and testing. And against this background, it can safely be argued that language policymakers in Europe are rising to the challenges posed by our increasingly plurilingual societies. And they're doing so by elaborating new competence frameworks that endorse the implementation of the multilingual paradigm in two key areas of language education, that is to say, language pedagogy and curriculum design. And one such framework is the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, with new descriptors published in February 2018. This document underscores the importance of mediation as a communicative language activity that fosters plurilingualism. And plurilingualism is the new goal of language education in the 21st century. In the CEFR, plurilingualism is presented as an uneven and changing competence, which involves the flexible use of a single, interrelated, uneven, and developing linguistic repertoire in order to accomplish a host of tasks. And so this presupposes that plurilinguals have a single, interrelated repertoire that they combine with their general competencies and various other strategies in order to accomplish a number of tasks. So what are these tasks? Well, there are various. First of all, code switching from one language or dialect or variety to another. And then express oneself in one language and understand the person speaking another. This is called receptive bilingualism. Also, another task is to call upon the knowledge of a number of languages to make sense of a text, and this is translanguaging. And also, another task is to recognize words from a common international store in a new guise, for instance, Anglicisms or false Anglicisms. And then, central to today's presentation is mediation, the task of mediating between individuals with no common language or dialect or variety, even with only a slight knowledge of oneself. Then there is bringing the whole of one's linguistic equipment into play, experimenting with alternative forms of expression. This also comes under the umbrella of translanguaging. And finally, exploit paralinguistics, mime, gesture, facial expression. I told you before, the language model endorsed by this model is an ecological model of language, which involves the use of all semiotic resources to make meaning. Now let's concentrate particularly on mediation. And this one requires integrated skills, spoken and written reception, and also production, plus frequently also interaction. But what does mediation actually entail according to the CEFR? In mediation, the user-learner acts as a social agent who creates bridges and helps to construct or convey meaning, sometimes within the same language, sometimes from one language to another. Cross-linguistic mediation, which is the topic of today's presentation. And where does mediation occur? The context social, pedagogic, cultural, linguistic, or professional. And cross-linguistic mediation activities involve, first of all, relaying specific information in speech and in writing from a long text, so selecting specific information or data from a much longer unabridged text. It also involves explaining data in speech and in writing, for instance, charts, graphs, diagrams. It also, cross-linguistic mediation activities also include processing text in speech and in writing, such as a summary, and translating a written text in speech and in writing. And this is really at the core of today's presentation. So let's move on to identify the descriptors of the language abilities necessary for translating a written text at the higher levels of language proficiency. First of all, let's read the note which precedes the descriptor for translating a written text in speech. As in any case in which mediation across languages is involved, users may wish to complete the descriptor by specifying the languages concerned. This is quite important because the descriptor deliberately does not address the issue of translating into and from the mother tongue. Why? Because for a plurilingual person, the mother tongue and best language are not necessarily the same ones. So language A is the learner's best language, and this is the source language, the language the learner translates from. And language B is the target language, the new language, the language the learner translates into. So at C1 level, a competent plurilingual person can provide fluent spoken translation into language B of complex written texts written in language A on a wide range of general and specialized topics, capturing most nuances. At C2 level, the learner can provide fluent spoken translation into language B of abstract texts written in language A on a wide range of subjects of personal, academic, and professional interest, successfully conveying evaluative aspects and arguments, including the nuances and implications associated with them. So the functional ability here is capturing the nuances of meaning. Let's now compare and contrast these abilities and also descriptors with translating a written text in writing. At C1 level, the learner can translate into language B abstract text on social, academic, and professional subjects in his or her field written in language A, successfully conveying evaluative aspects and arguments, including many of the implications associated with them, though some expression may be over-influenced by the original, so some degree of interference is allowed at this stage, at this level. At C2 level, the learner can translate into language B technical material outside his or her field of specialization written in language A, provided subject matter accuracy is checked by a specialist in the field concerned. So as you can see, translating a written text in writing is more formal than translating a written text in speech. And also the functional abilities are more complex. First of all, you need to transfer meaning from one natural language to another. And this is the same as translating a written text in speech. But in addition to this, the target language text has to be comprehensible, and it has also to adhere to the relevant conventions in the target language, and also needs to be able to capture the nuances in the original. So, summing up, the competence model for translating a written text in writing at the higher levels of language proficiency can be outlined as follows. In order to become competent plurilinguals, learners need to be able to mediate a variety of texts between the language they know best, and that is the source language, and the new language, language B, the target language. And one of the cross-linguistic mediation activities learners engage in is translating a written text in writing. And this activity involves processing and articulating the source message in the target language. Hence, it focuses on conveying meaning from one language to another. The underlying notion of translation is meaning transfer, in other words. And this requires integrated receptive and productive skills to achieve comprehensibility, fluency, and accuracy in the target language. So, translation is fully legitimized in language learning as a cross-linguistic mediation activity that can be carried out in a personal, social, academic, or professional context. Does this also mean the blurring of the distinction between pedagogical and professional translation? Well, not quite, and with good reason. The CEFR is very clear on this point. Translating a written text in writing is by its very nature a more formal process than providing a spoken translation. However, this CEFR descriptive scale is not intended to relate to the activities of professional translators or to their training. Here, plurilingual users or learners are being asked to reproduce the substantive message of the source text rather than necessarily interpret the style and tone of the original into an appropriate style and tone in the translation, as a professional translator would be expected to do. And you're probably very familiar with this concept. Well, that said, I contend that to gain a proper understanding of the true relationship between pedagogical translation on one side of the fence and professional translation on the other side, we need to compare and contrast the CEFR with the recent model of professional translation competence elaborated in Europe. And I'm referring here to the European Masters in Translation Competence Framework 2017. This model, this new model, has been elaborated in response to three main developments in the provision of translation services in the last decade. First of all, the impact of technology. Secondly, the continuing expansion of English as a lingua franca. And thirdly, the role played by artificial intelligence and the social media in communication. Moreover, the EMT competence framework builds on the Wheel of Competence published in 2009. This is also a crucial document because it views translation as a process designed to meet an individual, societal, or institutional needs. The aim of the EMT framework is to consolidate and enhance the employability of graduates with master's degrees in translation throughout Europe. And translation is here considered a multifaceted profession. So the framework recommends that translator education and training at master's degree level should equip students not only with a deep understanding of all the processes involved in conveying meaning from one language to another, but also it should equip trainees with the ability to perform and provide a translation service in line with the highest professional and ethical standards. In order to achieve these aims, the EMT framework defines 5 complementary areas of competence, all equally important: language and culture, translation, technology, personal and interpersonal skills, and also the ability to provide a professional service at the highest level of ethical and professional standards. And I'm going to concentrate on 2 of these 5 key areas. Why? Because I think they include skills that will have been developed by language undergraduates by the time they achieve their degree. So let's have a look at language and culture first of all. It includes transcultural and sociolinguistic awareness and communicative skills. Also, and this is very important because it is different from the CFR. Notice this: the framework takes as a premise that a high level of language competence in at least 2 working languages should be a prerequisite for access to any EMT degree program. And by high level of language competence, we mean level C1 and above. Well, the framework recommends the language A, which is the main target language in translator training, should be mastered at level C2 or with native or bilingual proficiency. And the main source languages should be mastered at level C1. And this is, in fact, the level achieved by a graduate in modern languages. The difference is that in pedagogical translation, you always tend to translate into the new language, whereas in translator education and training, you translate into your best language rather than the new language. But what I'd like to underline here is that the competence, the right competence in the source languages will have been acquired through language learning in undergraduate degree programs. Now, the next competence area is translation. And here translation should be understood in the broadest sense possible. It encompasses not only the actual meaning transfer between two languages, which was the focus of pedagogical translation, but also all the strategic, methodological, and thematic skills that come into play before, during, and after the transfer phase. So you start with document analysis before translating, and then you end with final quality control. In which context? Not just specialized context, not sort of academic or generally professional context. Here, the EMT competence framework is very specific. The contexts are domain-specific, media-specific, and situation-specific domains, such as public service translation, interpreting, localization, and audiovisual translation. Well, a graduate in modern languages will have acquired at least a general understanding of the meaning transfer phase between languages as one of the main processes involved in professional translating. So, summing up, if we compare the CFR and the EMT model, we can identify three convergent, overlapping areas of competence, knowledge, and skills that will have been achieved in undergraduate degree programs in modern languages. So, what are they? Well, first of all, transferring meaning from one natural language to another, capturing nuances of meaning. Well, meaning transfer is one of the processes involved in professional translation too. Also, graduates will have achieved plurilingual competence, which requires receptive and productive skills. And well, this is an invaluable asset for developing an advanced competence in language and culture and translation. And the third overlapping area is that in the CFR, learners will be exposed to a variety of texts on social, academic, professional, and technical subjects. And that will be a valuable asset for developing the ability to translate in domain-specific, media-specific, and situation-specific types of translation. So, on the basis of this comparative analysis, I hope I have persuaded you. In my view, translation education can be conceived as a continuum that starts with pedagogical translation in undergraduate degree programs and can end with professional translation in postgraduate degree programs, such as the one you are attending, I believe, now under the direction of Professor HammouDa Salih. Well, what are the consequences for scholarship? Well, one of the consequences is that the traditional map of translation studies drawn in 1972 by James Holmes can be redrawn in such a way that translation in language teaching, as well as translator training, can be considered one of the subdomains of translation education, which in turn is part of applied translation studies alongside translation aids, translation policy, and translation criticism. And what are the consequences for applied linguistics? Well, just a moment, pedagogical translation can claim back its place in applied linguistics and be studied in second language acquisition studies, bilingual education, language teaching, and testing. Because pedagogical translation, in a way, has been a Cinderella, both in applied linguistics and because of communicative language teaching, and also in translation studies. But now we are witnessing a new way of seeing pedagogical translation, readmitted, reappraised, not only in applied linguistics, but also in translation studies. Now, the question that now comes to my mind as a scholar, as a teacher, is this: how are scholar teachers rising to the challenge of implementing the recommendations contained in the CEFR? And to answer this question, it is worth remembering Guy Cook's view on this point. In the last chapter of his landmark work, Translation, just a moment, Translation in Language Teaching, an Argument for Reassessment, Guy Cook argues, if the benefits of tilt were to be recognized in theory as well as practice by those in position of power and influence, as well as by rank and file teachers, it would have positive repercussions and would initiate activity and innovation in many areas beyond classroom practice. New materials would need to be written, and new tests designed, and new elements introduced into teacher education. Well, we are at the stage now when the benefits of pedagogical translation have been recognized by educationalists, translation scholars, language policy makers, as well as teachers. And we're also at the stage when new course books are being written for undergraduate students of modern languages. So I will now move on to survey a representative sample of such books, and in order to do so, I will use the tripartite model for analyzing approaches and methods put forward by Jack Richards and Theodore Rogers. And their model consists of three elements: approach, design, and procedure. I'll focus in particular on the approach, which involves theory of language learning, theory of translation, and also pedagogic theory, educational philosophy. Whereas the design and the procedure are more detailed. The design involves general and specific objectives of the method, syllabus model, types of learning and teaching activities, learner roles, teacher roles, and the role of instructional materials. And then the procedure consists of classroom techniques, classroom practices, and classroom behaviors. So let me have a look at the first. Let's look together at the first course book, which takes on board the recommendations made by the CEFR. And this is Mundos en Palabras, Learning Advanced Spanish Through Translation, co-authored by Carreras and two other scholar teachers in modern languages. Now, let's have a look. First of all, the most important thing to notice is that it is written in Spanish for advanced Spanish through translation. So the activities are mainly focused on translating into Spanish as the new language. As far as the aims are concerned, the aim of this textbook, the declared aim of this textbook, is to acquaint undergraduate students with the text typological conventions in both Spanish and English so that they can make informed translation decisions. Chapter 1 to 3 introduce translation theory and practice and the use of documentation resources. Chapters 4-11 deal with an array of text types, including audiovisual text. And chapter 12 deals with the translation of language varieties, so different registers, for instance. So you can clearly see here an overlap between the skills required as prerequisites for entering master's degree programs. You can see that we have audiovisual texts here. We also have the use of documentation resources before undertaking the phase of meaning transfer per se. And also there's quite a lot of translation theory included right at the beginning. So the intention here is to equip students to become competent plurilingual individuals and also to acquire the skills that they may wish to further develop at postgraduate level. Now, the second book, let me move this here. Okay. Now, the second book, published again in 2018, is authored by Dominic Stewart, and it is aimed at advanced students of English as the target language, as the new language. The title of the book is Italian to English Translation with Sketch Engine, a guide to the translation of tourist texts. So it focuses, unlike Mundos en Palabras, it focuses on one subject-specific domain, and that is tourist text. And it is subdivided into 15 teaching units, each corresponding to a chapter. And each chapter contains a short text to be translating for an international readership requiring information on tourist sites in Italy. Also, there is a suggested translation sentence by sentence, which is based on successful versions submitted by students after 2 or more months training. So you can see here how collaborative learning comes into play and is foregrounded in this method. And then there is also a discussion on unsuitable equivalents or appropriate alternatives arising from rendering submitted by the students. So there is a continual dialogue between teachers and students, aiming to achieve a translation that is comprehensible, that is also fluent, and is also accurate, just as envisaged by the CEFR at the C1 and C2 levels of language proficiency. Moreover, the translations were carried out using online language resources, above all, electronic corpora through the Corpus software sketch engine and online learners dictionary. And this is interesting because I haven't really emphasized this point too much, but one of the competence areas earmarked by the EMT competence framework is technology. So this book in particular, equips students with some of those technological skills that will be further developed at postgraduate level. Here we have the first introduction to online resources and corpora. And then the third book I'm going to survey is not out yet. It will be in a couple of months or so. And this is Linking Wor's a course book on cross-linguistic mediation. And here the word translation has been deliberately replaced by cross-linguistic mediation, because the book includes not only translating a written text in writing, but also other mediating activities. Now, let's have a look how it's organized. 12 teaching units, and each of them contains an introduction, an explanation of linguistic concepts to carry out lexical and morphosyntactic analysis, illustrative examples from a wide range of specialized texts, again, in line with the CFR, monolingual mediation tasks, a discussion of the translation problems that may arise when there are differences across English and Italian, and this discussion is undertaken collaboratively in line with the principles of collaborative learning. And then we have translation tasks into and from Italian as language lay at level C1 and above. So a slight difference here from the CFR, that students are encouraged to translate into and out of the language A, rather than focusing only on translating into the language B. And in doing so, in these activities, students will be able to apply some of the translation procedures commonly used by professional translators to address problems of non-equivalence at the level of lexis or syntax. And here the translation strategies are drawn on the book by Mona Baker, in other words, also Gideon Turi. So there we are. There's a lot of translation theory that comes to the surface in addressing translation problems. And then finally, there is a summary of the main points to remember. And there is an additional chapter that is devoted to additional mediation tasks. You remember, the activities are varied. For instance, you are asked to interpret a diagram, a graph, a chart, or provide a summary, or you are asked to extract from a long unabridged text specific information. Well, this chapter is devoted to give the full range of cross-linguistic mediation activities envisaged by the CEFR. So I think there is convergence here at the level of approach, design, and procedure. There is no doubt that the ecological model of language description is fully endorsed. The notion of translation as meaning transfer is also upheld, and the theory, the underlying theory of learning, is inspired by the principles of socio-constructivism or sociocultural theory. As regards the design and procedure, there are slight differences. For instance, Dominic Stewart's book concentrates very much on tourist texts, but only on tourist texts, and the use of corpora, whereas the other two textbooks don't envisage the use of corpora, and the choice of text type is much broader. So where do we come from here? And what about the time, Hammouda? Can I add a few more things?
Yes, please, in a couple of minutes.
Well? Okay, right.
Yes.
So where do we go from here? Well, it is my view that in order to unlock the full potential of pedagogical translation as a cross-linguistic mediation, scholarship and classroom practice would benefit from the contribution of an array of disciplinary fields: LSP studies, translation studies, second language acquisition studies, bilingual education, contact linguistics, educational linguistics. Now, this transdisciplinary orientation is gaining ground. We have a journal, Translation and Translanguaging in Multilingual Contexts. And Professor Salhi knows it very well because he is a distinguished and valuable member of the editorial board, of the founding editorial board. And what is the aim of TTMC? The aim is to provide a forum for innovative studies that find their place at a crossroads between translation studies and bilingual education, language teaching methodology, second language acquisition, curricular design, and language policy and planning. But this is not the end of the story. We also have two recent collected volumes, and the first one is Übersetzung, Translation, the possibility of thinking about pedagogy in a different way, co-edited by Nicholas Engel and Stefan Kungerter. Excuse my German, which is non-existent, but what is important about this volume is the notion of pedagogy as translation and translation as pedagogy. In this volume, educational theory is viewed as a form of cultural translation work that hosts unfamiliarity and strangeness. This is very much in line with the CFR. And translation is viewed as a form of learning. What type of learning? Learning to live within the plurality of languages and with their incompatibility. And the second collected volume is the Routledge Handbook of Translation in Education that I co-edited with Maria González Davies and has been published this year. The goal pursued by the 26 contributors to the volume is to lay a sound foundation for the future cooperation between translation scholars and educationalists. And to this end, the volume adopts a transdisciplinary perspective and presents the state-of-the-art of the place and role of translation in a variety of educational contexts worldwide, not only higher education, but also primary education and professional translation training, heritage language, and teacher training, and others. So, in conclusion, I think the future looks bright for the revival of pedagogical translation within a plurilingual and pluricultural perspective on education, not just language education, but education in general. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sara Laviosa, for this really insightful presentation on translation, translanguaging, mediation, and how translation can be used as a tool for to serve learning, to serve the needs of multilingual community individuals. Thank you for collecting everything into this presentation, despite the fact that the encounter was initially thought of as an informal exchange of thoughts and ideas. So thank you very much for the hard work. I know you are very well organized. well, just one thing before I open it up to the students. We have received a request from the students requesting you or asking you to share with them this PowerPoint presentation afterwards.
Yes, of course. Yes, you're very, very welcome. You're very, very welcome to write to me also, should you wish to have some more information at any time. I do that all the time, but you are a special group of students, so because you're master's degree students. So I'd like really to know what you think.
Yes.
Precisely because there is still some uncertainty about the boundaries between pedagogical translation and professional translation. This topic of discussion has been engendered by a question that Silvia Bernardini put to me during a conference. Well, what does it mean then that undergraduates will acquire the same professional skills that we are in master's degree programs are developing with our students? Well, not at all. And yes, at the same time, in the sense that they are different, and I like to see them, treat them differently, because they are different. There is no doubt about it. You tend to translate into the language B, whereas this is just one of the major differences. But within a plurilingual paradigm, this distinction is becoming less marked. And so I visualize it as a continuum. If I may say so, back in 1998, a famous collected volume by Kirsten Malkier, Translation and Language Teaching and Translation. And in that book, not all scholars were in favor of using pedagogical translation in modern languages degrees. And one of these was Christine Schaeffner, who said, oh no, please, because students get the wrong idea. They think that they need to be absolutely accurate, and then it's so difficult for us to make them unlearn what they learned in the undergraduate degree programs. Well, that was 1998. Well, things have moved on. This is the point I'm trying to make. Things have moved on. It is an asset. Now, as conceived within the multilingual paradigm, pedagogical translation is an asset and not something that should be undervalued.
Thank you very much.
I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah, we will take some questions, perhaps a first round of questions, and I'm worried about time. But let me throw out one question about translating as a learning tool and translating for the market. Translating for the market is a fully fledged activity and a well-framed activity, in the sense that you can work more easily with some pragmatic tools, in the sense that you will be having a very clear idea about to whom you are translating, from whom you are translating, and all of the other participants in the translated process and event in general. So you have a very clear idea, you know this is reality, it's real. So my worry now, my question is, if you are taking translation which requires those participants very clear idea about the context, including the participants, and there are so many other issues that impact the choices of the translator, such as some cultural issues, some even the loyalty and faithfulness. Don't you think that if we drag translation to be serving learners to get rid of a basic element of the process of translation, which is the interpretation, you will be having a very narrow room for interpretation because you are deprived of the basic elements in the context. This is the first question. And the second, well, perhaps I will let you answer this one, and I will open it to the floor. So I'm afraid we don't have much time, and I don't like to monopolize the floor. Do you like, Sara, do you like to add more questions, 2 or 3 questions, so that you can answer them all together?
Yes, yes, I can make a note of the questions.
Please.
So that's not a problem. Do you want me?
I know you are expert in note taking.
Well, yeah, I used to.
Yeah.
Not so much.
Yeah. So
But
please.
Yes, I used to use shorthand.
Shorthand, yes. The floor is yours, ladies and gentlemen.
So, would you like me to answer your question?
If there are no questions, I will give you the floor from the participants.
Yeah.
Any question? Okay, you have the floor. Over to you, Sara.
Okay. So, shall I answer your
Sorry, there is some delay, and there is no prompt reaction, but we can see that there is
yeah, 2 participants raised hand.
Yes.
Yes,
so
I've
we
sent
have
you a question. It was a written one. Can you please?
So we have Wael Ben Ali, Sara.
Yeah, just a moment. Shall I switch this? Shall I? So
yes.
I can see.
Yes, please. Can you? Yeah, great. That's good.
Much better. Yes. Hello.
Hello. Yes. So I can see Wael Ben Ali, Sara Al-Batut, and then Hind Busrih. Wael, go ahead.
Hello, Dr. Sara.
Yes.
Well, I have basically 2 questions. The first question.
Raise your voice. I can't understand why. Hang on, just a moment. Let me get this sorted out.
Can you hear me now?
Wait a second, Wael. I can hear you.
Yeah, sure.
Try. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Excellent.
Excellent. Well, I have 2 questions. The first question is, do you think that the grammar translation method is enough for second language acquisition? Because as far as I know, there was a shift from the grammar translation method to the audiovisual method and then the CLT. My second question is concerning the code switching. Do you think that the code switching can poorly reflect on the field of translation in general and the quality of translation specifically?
Okay. Yeah, grammar translation.
So,
yeah,
Sara, can we take a couple of questions?
Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So yes. Now we have Salwa Al-Batut.
Hello, doctor. How are you?
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks. My question is very simple. Would you please summarize in few words the meaning of cross-linguistic mediation? Or I would like to have a definition of cross-linguistic mediation. Thanks.
Okay, the meaning of cross-linguistic mediation.
Sara, sorry, we have another just lost Hind Busrih, and then I'll give you the floor. Hint.
Any more?
Yes, one more. Hint. Go ahead, please. Can you hear?
Hello?
Hello, yes. Go ahead,
Can
please.
you hear me? Thank you, Doctor. Your presentation was very insightful. I have conducted master studies research about code switching in the EFL context among the upper intermediate and advanced adult students. And I would like you to suggest some area of research that will combine the two fields of translation and code switching. Any suggestions of research areas where this can be possible, please, if you can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
One last question from Amin Fajri. Amin.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I appreciate your presentation. That was very insightful, fruitful. A quick question.
I can't hear you.
We can hear you.
Hello?
Okay. So thank you, Doctor, for this fruitful presentation. Quick question, if you can just elaborate maybe an example or two of service provision, personal and interpersonal, and the classroom behaviors.
Sorry, two examples of?
The service provision.
Service provision.
Personal and personal and interpersonal.
Personal and interpersonal.
Maybe classroom behaviors. And this this is part of the framework. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
Thank you. Over to you, Sara.
Okay, examples of service provision. Do you mean the competence area that was included in the EMT competence framework? Well, I think Professor Salhi has answered that question, because when he said that in translator training, we have the whole team of players participating in the transition process, and that would be an example of service provision. So you would have training not only on how to carry out the meaning transfer, but also how to negotiate with your clients, your commissioners, the level of pay, the level of the different aspects of the profession. Okay, and that if you read the book by Donald Kearley, within the fields of socio-constructivism and also expertise studies, he sees the classroom as a workshop that simulates the real world. And in fact, students do carry out translation projects that are then either published or they are commissioned. So they are real life mini projects, and they're sort of in a microcosm, and they will deal not only with the translation per se, but also negotiating other aspects. The pay, the time management is very important as well. As regards example service provision, and also what was the other example you wanted to discuss? Example of? I missed the other one. One was an example of service provision. And
personal and interpersonal behavior.
Oh, right. Yes. Teamwork, personal skills. That is very important. Again, the EMT framework, how you liaise with the other members of the team, your fellow students, the commissioner, the client. How do you cooperate with them? Are you going to be bossy? Are you going to be meek and humble. Or this is very, very important, because translation is not done anymore by an isolated translator in front of the screen, just like that. It's collaborative work as well. This is why collaborative learning in language teaching is very important for developing even more those personal skills. Don't undermine. I mean, when you work in a team, there are so many dynamics, or there are so many aspects of group psychology that come into play that are just as important as the technological skills and other skills. Okay.
Sara, sorry, before you move on to the next question, I would like to step in within the same question. Here there is a small problem I would like to raise here related to the profile of the teachers or the educators. Here, what is required is a teacher who is a mentor or a coach in a way, because the classroom has to be made into a workshop, as you put it, and it has to be a learner-centered classroom.
Yeah.
There is a problem in Tunisia, and I would like to know how things are going on in Europe and in Italy in particular. We really, and because I am chairing this master's committee and managing the master's program, I'm really struggling to find the right profile of teachers and educators who combine both pedagogical knowledge, how to transmit knowledge, and also professional experience that is required to act as a mentor. Well, there are some, let's say, reasons for that. Some of them are financial. It is not rewarding for professional translators and conference interpreters to act as teachers, and teaching is not well paying here as a job compared to conference interpreting basically and translation. On the other hand, if you are relying on teachers, university professors, you may run the risk of having a profile with no experience whatsoever. So how to strike a balance, how to solve this issue? Thank you.
This is training for translator trainers, and courses that specialize in training translator trainers are few and far between. So it's this that needs to be developed, where you have more training, because yes, there is a gap between professional expertise and pedagogic skills. And this applies to many other areas of teaching. Okay? There is a difference between knowledge and competence in the subject field and knowledge and competence in how to teach that particular subject field. This is a hot issue. It is an unsolved issue. So it is an ongoing problem that applies to all other areas of knowledge. And the only way you can overcome it is providing more and more training, collaborative training between the expert in the field and the expert in educational philosophy, and the two have to cooperate. So I don't think there is much progress being made at the moment. So it's for the future. It's an issue for the future to be addressed. Now, as for translation and code switching, and research for translanguaging code switching, where code switching comes under the umbrella term of translanguaging. right? So, and translanguaging is part of bilingual education, bilingual and multilingual education. So that's where you got to look for inspiration. Another offshoot of bilingual education is educational linguistics, which is very much in line with the multilingual turn. In fact, it is precisely this area of knowledge and scholarship that has pushed towards the so-called multilingual turn. So code shifts, code switching, however, it's a concept, it's a little bit controversial, because code switching presupposes the separation of languages, and then you are switching from one language to the other. Okay, whereas the concept of translanguaging presupposes that all plurilingual individuals act on one single language repertoire, which is plurilingual. And so there is no distinction. You draw as you think fit on this linguistic repertoire. So the best way to go deeper into this subject is certainly bilingual education, translanguaging, educational linguistics. So Ofelia Garcia, Li Wei, Kanagaraja, and these are the authors who have who are very knowledgeable and very passionate about this particular topic. If I answered yes, areas of research containing code switching, then the meaning of cross-linguistic mediation. What is cross-linguistic mediation? It's a particular type of mediation that involves the use of two or more languages, because mediation may also involve negotiating meaning within the same language. For instance, when I summarize a piece of writing for you in the same language, that is a form of mediation, but it's not cross-linguistic mediation. It's monolingual mediation or intralinguistic mediation. So mediation essentially is where I am creating bridges between two realities, language behaviors, for instance, situations, and I try to make bridges in what way? I am a facilitator in encouraging communication. This is my role. So in cross-linguistic mediation, I contribute to make meanings in order to overcome difficulties relating to misunderstandings. Okay, so I am a facilitator as a cross-linguistic mediator. This is the essence of mediation in general. Cross-linguistic mediation is when I have to master two languages at the same time. And this happens in everyday life. There is going to be a special issue of translation and translanguaging multilingual contexts on non-professional translation, natural cross-linguistic mediation in everyday life. That is to say, the mediation that is carried out by multilingual, by plurilingual children, for instance, when they accompany their relatives, parents or relatives, to the hospital, to school, and they continually act as mediator, as cross-linguistic mediators. Okay, if I answer this question, so in society at large, this is a real life phenomenon, and in the classroom, we try to equip plurilingual individuals to deal with these situations, as well as the need to develop these skills academically and also professionally. There's a lot of translating of cross-linguistic mediation that takes place at work, but it's not labeled as professional translating. It's not labeled as professional cross-linguistic mediation, and yet it is carried out in professional contexts. I hope I have answered this the question. And I like the question about grammar translation method. I really like this topic.
Yes, thanks a lot.
Grammar translation method has had a bad press, but as a matter of fact, some of the principles of the grammar translation method are very useful at the lower levels of language competence, when you need to, we concentrated on C1 and C2, but at the lower levels of language proficiency in the CFR, what you're actually doing is to translate in a way that is accurate. First of all, lexically and grammatically accurate, short text, authentic or reasonably authentic, realistic text, not inventing sentences. This is the difference between the new approach and the grammar translation method. But basically, the basic principle that you can learn by contrastive analysis between the source and the target language, and also by bilingual glossaries and filling the gaps and trying to achieve accuracy. Well, these principles are enshrined in the grammar translation method, but of course they were discarded by the reform movement that accused the grammar translation method of not being an effective method. Now, Guy Cook, in his book, 2010, he considers some of the principles of the grammar translation method reframed within a communicative and multilingual perspective, right? So let's not throw the baby with the bathwater, but let's try to understand what is good in every single methodology, and then bring all these principles together to enhance learning, because this is the goal of language education and language teaching in the classroom. I'm not sure whether I've answered all the questions that you put to me. Have I missed anything?
Yeah, I think you covered all of the questions. Yeah. So, Hind, you want to take the floor? No. Yes, let me put another question related to translation again.
Sorry, sir, I have already asked the question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Can you remove that hand, please?
Yes, sure.
Thank you. So translation here, despite the fact that we can offer, or we lay the foundation for a fully fledged and let's say a context in which we can translate, and we can do a simulation in the classroom to be reproducing a situation in the market on reality. So it is a reality-like situation, but still making a translation here as still a tool to serve other things might have, let's say, repercussions on the mission of the translator, because translation, after all, is communication per se. Some argue that translation is an intercultural, interlingual
Absolutely.
communication.
Yeah.
So it is an end in itself rather than a tool. Dragging it to be a tool for something else might make the activity or the exercise more artificial rather than genuine and authentic. So how do you reply? I know that this field is of research, and this experience is gaining ground, but how do you react? How do you respond to those criticisms?
Right, okay. Translation as a means and translation as an end, right? Now, the CFR seems to have overcome that distinction because they have added mediation, and translation is a form of mediation, as one of the communicative activities alongside reception, production, interaction. So it has claimed back its place in communicative language teaching. So you can argue that is really no longer a means to an end, but it's a skill in its own right. The fifth skill, if you like, this is an old concept, but people don't like to talk about the fifth skill. Why? Because all these skills are complementary and interrelated. And if you talk about first skill, second skill, third skill, and so on, you give the impression that there are clear boundaries between these skills. And this is why the CFR no longer talks about listening comprehension and reading comprehension or whatever, but they talk about production, interaction, reception, and mediation, because they don't want to create boundaries between them, okay? Even production requires the ability to understand the information, right? Even production is interactive. So they're all interrelated. And they are considered to be skills, tasks. It depends very much on how you define the end. If the end is to translate professionally, then cross-linguistic mediation is not an end for the CEFR. But if you consider an end within the CFR, that is to say, the development of plurilingual and pluricultural competence, then mediation is an end in itself. You've got to learn to mediate, because mediation is part of your being as a multilingual or plurilingual subject, as Claire Cramsh would call it. So you need to be able to do this. Okay, so within the CFR, mediation, like production, reception, and interaction are ends in themselves, are skills, okay, that are part and parcel of us being multilingual subjects or plurilingual subjects. Whereas in the EMT framework, the end is different. The end is not just to be able to translate, but it's to be able to develop all those other skills. Translating is just one of them, but there are other 5 areas of competence that are all interrelated. So here there is a distinction between the two. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, you did. So we have perhaps time for 1 or 2 questions. Anyone? I don't see any hand shown. Perhaps one last question, Sara. Let's take the example of a refugee camp as a multilingual setting or environment. Most of the translation activities are being carried out by amateur translators. Some of the refugees, they get the service done by one of their relatives, their sons, for example, if they know English or French. I have serviced some of the refugee camps with translation, and I would like to ask whether this framework can include also services provided on an amateur basis, not by professionals. The framework or this approach is designed or orchestrated to produce professionals. But how about amateur translators? And I think amateur translators, they outweigh and outnumber, the professional translators in particular settings such as refugee camps.
Oh, yes. I think the CEFR includes, in the ambits where mediation takes place, you can see there are personal, social, academic, and professional contexts. So I would say the CEFR, if followed at all levels of linguistic proficiency, can equip graduates with non-professional translation skills, such as the ones that you've mentioned, at C2 level, certainly. So an example, you can have, yes, an undergraduate achieves C1, really, after the 3-year undergraduate course. So a graduate, a modern language graduate, should be able to carry out those tasks in non-professional environment. That is certainly one of the considerations. In fact, the multilingual term, which is fully endorsed by the CFR with new descriptors. In fact, they say the new descriptors are based on research on translanguaging, and the goal of language education is plurilingualism to meet the needs of an increasingly globalized migratory world. It really is, this is the research. Why has the multilingual term been framed the way that it has? Because of concerns raised by globalization and migration, multiculturalism, conflicts, and difficulties in communication. So the CFR, I think, has strong potential for equipping students to deal with those real-life situations, very important real-life situations.
Thank you. Last question from Shaima Gizani. Shaima?
Hello, everyone. Actually, it's not a question. I just raised my hand to thank Dr. Sara for her precious time. We're really lucky to have you today with us. And thank you again for your efforts, your great and serious work. But it's just a thank you.
So,
Hammouda,
yes.
I'm sorry, Shaima, I couldn't
It is
hear
a
you.
message of thanks. She wanted to thank you for your time.
All right.
Yes.
All right, yes, I captured that, but then I thought I missed the question, but that was the end. Thank you ever so much.
Yes.
Right, thank you ever so much. Yes,
Thank you so much, Sara. Really.
I did hear. Thank you. And look, you're really very, very welcome to write to me.
Please, can you share with me the presentation, and I can share
absolutely,
with the students.
I can add the references section, if you
Please.
like, for those
Yes.
interested in pursuing, because the actual presentation in PowerPoint does not have a list of references. So let me update that, so you have the complete picture.
Yes.
Okay?
Thank you very much, Sara.
Thank you.
Yes.
You're very, very welcome.
Please.
Thank
Well,
you. And all the
Dr.
best with the rest of your
Mansouri,
chapters
can I-
in translation.
Dr. Mansouri, yes, go ahead, please. Last question, perhaps, from Professor Mohammed Mansouri. You have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi. Good afternoon.
Dr. Sara, thank you very much for this presentation. I actually joined a little bit late, but I enjoyed the discussion very much. As I'm actually interested in those aspects of pedagogical translation, and I have always sought to make it a subject in its own right. As a, I would say, a gatherer of all skills, and as an aspect of the training, of a rounded training of anyone graduating in languages. I have always emphasized the aspect of reading. Reading is a shared activity between a medical doctor, an engineer, a lawyer, a judge, and it's these aspects of reading that tend to be a bit slighted in our programs. So I don't know whether you have experienced with you know, proposing different types of texts, and sometimes 2 or 3 versions of the same text as perceived by 3 experts. Have you tried this, and what are your conclusions?
Yeah, thank you very much for this observation and raising this issue. This is why I said that it's very important to have the contribution of LSP studies and LSP scholars, languages for special purposes, because there is no such thing as a degree in modern languages with no specialization. So there is always going to be some degree of even for modern languages students, and then you have teaching of languages in degrees in engineering, in economics, and so on and so forth. So there, where English is the medium of instruction, it's absolutely important that trainers, the teachers, collaborate among themselves and engage in an open exchange of knowledge and expertise with subject-specific experts in the fields, with the engineer, with the doctor, and so on. Only in this way, so the linguist and the expert in a particular disciplinary field work together, such as like in English as medium of instruction, or content and language integrated learning. In that way, you can succeed. I think in specialized degrees, the CEFR is useful as a background, and then obviously you've got to adapt it to your particular degree course. For a general degree in modern languages, it's absolutely perfect. For teaching English as teaching a language in a specialized degree, then it can be drawn on, but it doesn't answer all the questions. Okay, so it needs to be corroborated, it needs to be complemented by the contribution of experts in the fields here. And if you think about it, the C2 level, it says it's got to be accurate, but there is also the need to make sure that the expert in the field checks it for accuracy. So there's a little bit of hint there, which we can develop, which gives you a sort of direction. It points to the right direction. But that is a field, it's object of discussion in EMI, English as a Medium of Instruction, and Content and Language Integrated Learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. So before we end this talk, there is a question received from Amin Fej. He's asking, when can we expect your book, Linking Worlds or Words?
Yeah, well, July, it's under, I'm just correcting the second proofs. So it should be out in July, August, not later than August, ready for the next academic year, which starts in October. So by August, it should be out. Yes, thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks for this very good news indeed. Thank you again, Sara Laviosa, for this very well organized and informative and insightful presentation on a field that is really gaining ground, which is pedagogical translation as a cross-lingual and cross-linguistic mediation. The discussion was really very practical and made the participants to understand more this new field of study, this new field of education, this new field of profession. Thank you very much. This is not all. We still have another encounter in 1 hour or so with Tony Lech, who is a conference interpreter who will be speaking about COVID-19 and beyond, new challenges in interpreting RSI, or remote simultaneous interpreting platforms and tools. Be with us. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the talks. Okay,
thank you.
Goodbye.
Special thanks to you. Thanks to our other guests, Professor Mohammed Mansouri, Dr. Aida Sadiq, Amin Fajri, Marco Barletta, and others. Thank you very much, and see you in a while. Take care.
Okay, goodbye. Take care.